right, Professor Davis here, and we are going to finish up our discussion here on population and community with our introduction into ecology by focusing in on the society or sociobiology here at the very end. We'll come back to looking at ecology more with like the biomes and things like that later, but in this particular one, we're going to look at how animal behavior and how they live in groups contributes to their survival. So we're going to look first at some definitions. So society is a group of individuals, which are populations of the same species that are organized in a cooperative manner. So they're working together. Now, some animals are very social and they live in groups, while other animals want to live by themselves. They want to live solo. They want to be that lone wolf in a sense. They don't want to have anyone else around until it's mating season. All right, so there is a difference and it depends on the type of organism. Now, the purpose here when we look at this is going to be based on how they need to survive. Some organisms need that group community in order to survive because of the predator-prey relationship, or maybe due to the resources and how they gain resources. So there's a number of reasons why they might live in a group versus why they might live alone. Now, adaptive mating behaviors are part of this as well, because either way, if they live in a group or if they live by themselves, they've got to be able to get a mate in order to, again, be successful. And so these adaptive mating behaviors in nature show that the females are the ones who get to make the choice on who they mate with, and the males are going to compete for the female's attention. All right, and so the males will compete, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So what are the pros of living in a group and the cons of living in a group? Well, pros are going to be where you have more protection from predators. There is strength and protection in numbers, and that's what we see happening here when they live in a group. Another is that they can work together to find food. They can hunt together, they can work together in scouting out the food sources, like what honeybees do, things like that, and they can work together as a whole. We also see that they can divide up the labor when it comes to building shelters or taking care of the young or protection. They can actually divide that labor, and it can make them very successful. On the other hand, there are cons to living in a group. We do see that when we live in a group, there's increased competition for those limited resources. You're all living in the same area, so you're going to compete for the resources. We also see that there can be a spread of disease. When they live in close proximity and within a group setting, disease can spread very easily through their population. There's also a chance that there's increased aggression towards other group members. We've all been there where you end up living with somebody that you don't get along with, and you have some pent up aggression towards each other. And so that would be a con that can occur. Now, sociobiology is the study of these social behaviors and the interactions between group members. All right, so individuals who study the behaviors and how it affects how they work together is going to be looking at sociobiology. So let's look at some of the actual types of behaviors that are present. So the first one we want to look at are called ritualizations. Ritualizations sound just like what the first part of the word said. This creates rituals. These rituals are going to be displays of either aggression and courting. So displays of aggression, that's what we're going to talk about first. These are usually conflicts over limited resources. So either over food, water, shelter, mates, things that are limited within their group. These are normally resolved, though, without bloodshed. They're not really out to hurt or kill each other, because then that hurts the group as a whole. So what they do is they act out their aggression. Now, sometimes are they injured in this process? Yes. But the point is to not injure them and hurt them to where they can't be a productive part of the population. All right, and so that's a big part here. Confrontation in this case normally ends when one becomes subordinate. One is going to ultimately submit to the other. And this is where that idea of the internal conflict of fight or flight happens. So the organism has to decide, is it worth fighting for, or should I just submit and flee and get away? Okay. Another type of ritualization is the display of mating rituals or courtships. These are signals used to prepare the sexes for mating. Females usually make the choice of the mate because of their limited egg production. They only have so many eggs. And so because of this, they get to be pickier of who gets access to those eggs. And so this is why they're the ones who normally get to pick the mate. Sexual selection is important in order to have good reproductive success for that individual. They want the best success for their offspring, and that's again where that survival of the fittest comes in. Some best examples of actual mating rituals and courtships are seen in birds. And so again, I have a couple of videos. I have a bird song learning video that shows that in this particular case, the bird makes the most complex song it can. The more complex its song and display is, the more mates it attracts. On the other hand, the birds of paradise, they are notorious for their courtship displays, their feathers, the noises they make, the songs they sing in order to attract females. And again, you can look these up on YouTube by putting in and searching these types of topics like courtship rituals, birds of paradise. Okay, they'll come up with lots of different videos. These videos also, a lot of times these clips come from videos like Planet Earth or Blue Planet, that kind of stuff, Life. Those are really good documentaries where a lot of these clips are also located. The next type of behavior is dominance hierarchies. These occur when there's a pecking order that has become established. Now, when this occurs, we have a higher ranking individual that's normally termed as the alpha, that's considered the strongest and the most fit within the group. Now, being the alpha sounds great because you get better access to resources, you get to have first choice of the food and the mates and the shelter and all of that stuff compared to the lower individuals. The problem though is you're then responsible also for defending the whole group. So when an outsider comes in, you're the one that has to go out and defend the group, put your life at risk. They've been willing to give you the better resources so that you can then better protect them. Okay. The point of these hierarchies a lot of times is to reduce aggression between group members. And this is great until there is an actual challenge that takes place within the group. When the balance of power shifts and somebody challenges the alpha, then it could cause the dynamics to change. That's fine because it normally will even back out, but it can cause some of that conflict to take place. The next one is the territoriality. When we look at territories, these are going to be where they defend an area from other individuals. So it could be a group or it could be a single entity. The point of a territory is to help reduce aggression between group members. Individuals with better territories tend to get better mates, and it also improves their chances for mating and reproductive success, because remember, that's what being successful in nature is. Another one that we have example-wise is altruism. Altruism is where it's a more self-sacrificing behavior. They will end up doing alarm calls. This idea of watching and protecting the group, and when you see danger, you call out to give the warning signal. That allows them to go run away, but it puts the focus on you. And this is going to put the predator or whatever onto your scent, onto you, and you're ultimately willing to sacrifice your life for the group. Why would they do this? Well, this is going to happen in groups that share common genes. They're related. So they would be willing to lay down their life for their kids or their parents or a relative. This is why they would do this. Because again, even if they die, if their genes have been passed on, then they have been successful. All right. And so this is the idea of protecting each other, putting that on yourself in order to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. Now, guys, all of these types of interactions like dominance hierarchies, courtships, marking territories, and all that deal with communication. Communication is important to a society. This is where it involves actions of the sender. They send the stimulus, which influences the behavior on the receiver, that gives a type of response to take place. Now, some of these communication styles are better than others depending on the need. So the first one is a chemical type of communication, and this is going to rely a lot of times on smell. This is a release of a chemical kind of like pheromones. Pheromones are chemical messages that are passed between members of the same species. The messages are picked up by the receptors, normally in the nose, as smell. And this is what they do when they give off the signal that they're ready to mate, like when a dog goes into heat. Those signals can travel super long distances, and dogs within blocks can start to go crazy because they can smell that some dog is in heat. Another side of this too is that these chemical messages can travel both day and night. So they can be good during the day or at night. Another chemical messenger that's with the hormones or pheromones is seen with marking the territories. All right, we've seen dogs do this where they go and they mark a tree or a bush, especially on a walk. They're doing that so they leave behind their scent so other dogs can see that that's their territory. Most of the time it gets remarked by something else. But in the case, it does let them know that, hey, this belongs to someone else. Another example here is when the female lion lures the male lion by spreading their sex pheromones. But also they'll do posturing and movements to show that they are ready to mate as well. So when they posture and have these movements, that's where you actually see more of a visual type of communication. Another one that you may not like too much as the idea of mosquitoes. Female mosquitoes use CO2 concentrations to locate their victims. You giving off and breathing off carbon dioxide actually attracts the female mosquito. Female mosquitoes need up to about 3 blood mils in order to then lay their eggs. And so you help contribute to that when you're breathing, the idea is that attracts them. And so we use different types of chemicals and scents to try to mask our scent, like citronella, in order to protect ourselves. The next type of communication is auditory. Auditory is listening. So this is going to be vocalizations are useful in mating calls. You see that with the birds of paradise and how they mate with calling out. Distress signals and alarm calls would be part of an auditory type of communication. And some organisms mark their territory by sound, especially certain types of monkeys that are in trees. They will use this, and as the sound carries out, that helps mark their territory. Now, advantages when we look at auditory is that they're faster than chemical communication. It works, though, again, both day and night. But one thing that's cool about auditory types of communication is the patterns of it can be modified, and the intensity can be changed, or the frequency. Okay, and I gave the example in my class, the fact that sometimes we have professors who are super monotone, right? So when they teach, they just talk in one tone. You don't know if they're excited or if they're bored. It just sounds the same no matter what. And if you're sitting there in class, that makes it hard to pay attention and to stay awake. If we modify our speech patterns and we get excited about stuff and we start to explain things in an exciting way, and then other times we get quiet and that makes you want to listen to see what's happening, those changes are going to help draw in and engage the individual. And that's what auditory types of communications can do. And you can see that here with the bird and then also the cricket. That chirping sound that crickets make are to, of course, attract mates. But that also attracts predators, so they have to be careful. The next one are the visual types of communication. Visual communications are useful in absorbing rituals and aggression, as well as courtship rituals. And so with this, they do a certain kind of pattern or a certain kind of dance or certain kinds of displays in order to attract the mates or to show their aggression to each other. Disadvantage, though, of this type of communication is that it only works really during the day. If you try to do this at night, there's not enough light, so you can't be seen. And again, the birds of paradise are a great example of this. You could also look up the peacock spider, and it's a good example as well. All right, and so again, vocal types of communication. The last type of communication is the tactile. This deals with touch sensations. These are useful in birds feeding their chicks, the grooming process like you see here in the picture with the monkeys. And this all in turn helps form bonds. The more physical touch that takes place, the more bonding can take place. The problem is, though, when you come into close contact with each other, that's a disadvantage because you're putting yourself in a more vulnerable position to be in close contact. So this allows you to, like, if they don't like your communication, they don't like that you're touching them, you could have consequences occur quicker because you're in closer proximity. Another topic we need to look at in this idea of society is when organisms have relationships not just within their group, like we saw with the territory and the dominance hierarchy, but what about the relationships they have with different species? What are things that they have with different individuals? Well, there's 3 types of symbiosis that we want to talk about. The first one is called commensalism. Commensalism is where one species benefits and the other species is neither harmed nor benefited, meaning it's unaffected. And so in this case, one gets something good and the other gets really nothing out of it. So one of the examples would be things like when a bird builds a nest in a tree, okay? The bird gets the benefit of having a shelter in that tree because it built a nest. But that nest doesn't help the tree and that nest doesn't hurt the tree. And so because of that, it's a commensalism type of relationship. Another example is when we talk about the epiphytes in the tops of trees. They use the trees in order to access sunlight and nutrients, but they're not actually hurting the tree. Same thing with the barnacles on this well over here. As the well swims, the barnacles get food and they get fed, but they don't really hurt the well until there's too many of them on the well. All right, so some of these can be difficult because they can shift from where they don't hurt or benefit the host to where they hurt the host. And if that happens, that leads to the next type of relationship called parasitism. So parasitism is when one species benefits, but the host is actually harmed. They're hurt in the process. Now, there are different types of parasites. There are endoparasites. Endoparasites are the ones who live inside of the host. They get inside. These are things like bacteria. These are going to be things like protozoa pathogens, fungus, worms like tapeworms and roundworms that we talked about in the animal chapter. All right, so those are what we would consider endoparasites. They get inside the host and they're hurting the host in the process. Ectoparasites live on the outside of the host. They attach. And so these are things like leeches, ticks, mites. Okay, they're going to affect the outside of the host, but they still hurt the host. Okay. And then we also have some social parasites. Now, you may be thinking, oh, I know some social parasites. You have that individual in your life who just sucks all the energy out of you in social situations. That's not really what we're talking about here, but I mean, it could potentially apply. This is when one species uses a resource of another species. One of the best examples is the cuckoo bird. The cuckoo bird likes to lay its eggs in another bird's nest, and then it relies on that other bird to raise its young. So it doesn't even have to raise its young. So let me show you an example of this. So over here in the nest, you can see that one of those eggs is different than the others. It does not belong. That is the egg of the cuckoo bird. The cuckoo bird comes in and lays its egg in that nest. Okay? Normally, the mother bird doesn't even notice and still incubates the eggs like normal. But if the cuckoo bird is the first one to hatch, it will push the other eggs out of the nest. And you can see that in this series of pictures. If it hatches with the other young, it will try to push the other young out of the nest. This is to help get rid of its competition. If it gets rid of its competition, the mama bird normally still takes care of it, like you see in the bottom picture. That mom doesn't look anything like that baby, but it's taking care of it and getting it ready to move out and be able to survive on its own. So these are just some examples of what a social parasite would look like. The last type of reaction or type of symbiosis is mutualism. Mutualism is when both species benefit from the relationship. So they both get something good. Examples are when, say, one of them gets food or a home in exchange for something else, like protection. Okay, so one gets food, the other gets protection from that. So they both get something good. One of the best examples is shown here in the picture with the clownfish and the sea anemone. You've probably seen this in Finding Nemo when he tells Nemo, you need a brush, and he goes and brushes in the sea anemone. What that does is the sea anemone is getting fed by the bacteria and the protists and all the different algae and stuff that's on the skin of the fish. And it cleans the fish, making the fish healthier, but it gets food. On top of that, the sea anemone stings things, and it helps protect and allows that clownfish to have a home. So this is just an example. We also have mycorrhiza with plant roots. This is a type of fungus. It helps get nutrients to the plant, and the plant feeds the fungus. A lot of farmers actually add these to their fields to help their crops grow. Some of the bacteria in your intestines, they help you be able to absorb certain vitamins and minerals that you normally can't. They give them to you, and then you provide food to that bacteria. We also see another example is trypanosomes in the guts of termites. Same thing. Termites can't digest the wood they eat, and so these guys help with that. They digest it, giving nutrients to themselves, but also giving nutrients to the termite. Here's another example. We have some birds here. These birds are grooming and picking off parasites off of this particular animal. So when we look at this gazelle or whatever kind of horned animal it is, these guys are picking off those parasites, which then in turn helps that animal. They got fed. They gave a chance for this animal to be healthier. Okay, so these are our three examples of symbiosis. The next thing we want to talk about is community development. This is known as ecological succession. This is a progressive change in the composition and diversity of a community over time. Now, this could be a primary type of succession or a secondary type of succession. But either way, guys, when regrowth or rebuilding starts to happen, we always see that we start first with grass and weeds because they're the ones that can grow there the easiest. Then it progresses into shrubs and bigger types of plants, and then ultimately mature trees. Trees are going to come last, and they're going to be in more of those mature types of environments. So guys, if this is primary succession, this is going to occur when a community develops from no soil. There's no soil present. So the first thing we have to do is develop soil. This is done when lichens or lichens attach to a rock. When they do this, they break up the rock and they create soil. Once soil's created, we see plants can then move in, the grasses, the shrubs, and then the trees. Once plants move in, then animals can move in. Guys, this is seen with new volcanic islands, like when you see the chain of Hawaii Islands or Japan, that kind of thing, or after a volcanic eruption, you'd see this, as well as when a glacier retreats and rock is just left behind. Okay, this is when you would see primary succession. Secondary succession occurs after a community has been disrupted. This disruption could be something like a fire comes in, destroys most of the plants and animals. It could be after a field is plowed and we're going to let it go back and be more of a natural field. Okay, instead of a plowed field for farming, we want to let it recover. This is what secondary succession would be. So there's already soil, and so this one's quicker because the soil's already present and plants can start growing and animals can move in faster. Now, what kind of community is it depending on what type of succession is taking place? Well, guys, if the community is a developing community, it's a new community, we call it a pioneer community. This is the first community established within a secondary succession. On the other hand, a climax community is a more stable community. It's one that's been around a while. It's resilient to some changes, and it's been around a long time. So pioneer communities will eventually, over time, develop into climax communities. So let's take a look at a comparison chart. So if we look at this chart here, pioneer communities happen in more harsh environments, the new environment. Species diversity is low because it's been destroyed. So it has soil and maybe a few plants, but it's very basic. The stability in this kind of community is low, but it gives lots of opportunities. So the biomass, the amount of plants that start to grow, animals that move in is constantly increasing. Okay? In a climax community, the environment is more favorable. It doesn't change a whole lot. Species diversity is very high. Stability is also very high. And this means the biomass is not growing anymore. It's stable, right? So we don't have new things really moving in. We don't have things really dying out. We see a stable type of environment. Okay, so pioneer communities are the beginning. Climax are when they are mature. All right, last but not least, what are some factors that affect the type of climax community that's formed? A climax community might be a savanna or a forest or a rainforest or a desert. What determines what it's going to be? Well, rainfall. How much rainfall is present is going to help determine if it's a desert or a rainforest. Temperatures. If it's super cold all the time, we're not going to see certain plants and animals present. Sunlight. The amount of sunlight is going to contribute. Soil type. Latitude. How far away are we from the equator? And then altitude. How high in the air are we going? You guys have all gone to mountains and stuff before where you see the plants start to change from as you move up the mountain. You'll also see the animals change as you move up the mountain. That's because these factors affect what type of climax community is there. It doesn't mean the community is not mature. It just means that it changes it. Also, types of producers influence what type of consumers are going to be in that climax community. So if the main producers are grasses, because it's a grassland, you're going to see more grazing type animals because that's what's going to be present for them to eat. That's the bottom or base of the food chain. On the other hand, if there's a bunch of trees like in the rainforest, you're going to see more animals like monkeys and birds who live in those trees because that's the food source and the protection and shelter that's present there. So a lot of times the base of the food chain is going to drive what kind of animals you see in the area. And like I said, we are going to talk more about this kind of stuff a little later in a kind of review of ecology later on. But if you have any questions now, please let me know.